Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 183 of the Dynasty Junkies podcast, a proud member of the Dynasty Addicts Podcast Network, or the DAP Network, if you will. And I realized I didn't do that last week. I felt terrible for not dapping up or anything of whatever we're doing. But it's one of those things. We're just in off-season mode, but we got to start kicking it back into gear. And now that we're into August, officially recording this live on Thursday, August 1st, the home of the day of the first preseason game, the Hall of Fame game. But I got with me in the side seat tonight, Tommy. How you doing tonight, Tommy?
Man, I'm doing great. Tegan Cotoriano just went off in the Hall of Fame game. Couldn't be better.
Who? Yeah, exactly. Who? If you're watching us on Twitter or YouTube, you're seeing the guest already. If you're listening, we appreciate you listening and downloading. But we've got the one and only Bob Lung from Canton, Ohio. How are you tonight, Bob?
I'm fighting off a head cold. I spent all day stuffing 750 bags. Well, me and my wife and my family for the Expo, but we're ready.
That's good.
These swag bags this year are to die for. Like, we've got some of the coolest shit I've ever seen. Like, normally you get like, oh, here's coupons, like save 20% or blah, blah, blah. Or here's a koozie, right? No, we got phone chargers. Everybody's getting a phone charger. Like, nice. Like plug in, emergency, take with you, phone charger. Like from that. Dynasty Football Key. We've got mini footballs from Underdog. We've got another mini football from DFS and Donuts. We've got koozies. We've got, I know we got something else. Well, of course, you got the wristbands and all this stuff. But yeah, we usually we can lay them all flat and get like all 750 back into the original bag because it's all flat stuff. We have 23 boxes of just swag bags.
There you go.
And tomorrow I pick up 14 boxes of shirts. So needless to say, my home is a warehouse distribution center now. But we're ready.
That's right. I was going to say, if you're not aware, or if this is your first time on the show, the thing that Bob's talking about is the FF Expo next week. It is officially, I guess the official start is Friday, right? Like Friday is the kickoff party.
Tomorrow. Yeah.
So a week from tomorrow on August 9th, a lot of people will be meeting up in Ohio for some beers is kind of the thought. And we're just going to be hanging out with a bunch of our friends, our internet friends. I know, Tommy, you're not able to make it, but you will be there in spirit. Yes. We will try to have some fun on your behalf and with you and for you. There's a lot of people going, as always. It should be a great time. A lot of fun surprises and just fun meetups and hanging out with people. Before we get too deep in the show, though, Bob, I do want to give you a chance to kind of talk about it. If somebody hasn't heard about it, it might be a little too late to join up, right? But at the same time, next year is always, I'm not saying it is. I'm just saying it could be tricky, but it's always good to plan for next year, too. Right. So like this Expo thing is getting bigger every year. We don't quite know what next year is going to be. Maybe you do. But why don't you tell people what's different this year than last year if they haven't heard?
So this year we're adding a 4-hour Expo on Saturday. We're calling it, of course, Sports Betting Saturday. So 4 hours of 50 trade show booths and 2 stages full of everything you need to know to be a better, right? So whether you're prop bets, whether you're parlays, college, pro, just getting started, just want to learn how to bankroll manage and, that kind of stuff. All that will be live on stage with some of the smartest people in the country being there. So that's brand new that we added this year. All the other regular stuff, 2 parties as usual, Friday night party, Saturday night party, cornhole tournament, flag football tournament, live drafts in both for the draft night out guys, draftnightout.com. If you haven't got your tickets, get those. Or the Kings Classic going live, which Andrew Hall will be in a division higher than me, which we're going to have discussions. Fair. But no, all fun. I'm so excited Andrew gets to come and be a part of the Kings Classic, be live on Sirius XM Fantasy Sports Radio if you can't make it. But yes, next weekend, August 9th through the 11th. If you don't live that far from Canton, Ohio, which if you live anywhere between Chicago and Washington, D.C., that's 6 hours. Either way, come on over and check it out. Have fun with this. TheFantasyFootballExpo.com. Get your tickets. Grab all of your friends, your wife, your girlfriend. Get both. Bring them all over. So it'll be a good time. Hang out with each other. and hang out with us. We're going to have cigars Friday night. We got a cigar tent right beside the dome for the Friday party. Andrew and I are very excited about that part.
Very excited. Yep.
But yeah, it's going to be a good time. So definitely come and check that out. And Tommy, we hope you make it some of your You will have FOMO all over the place when you see all the pictures this weekend on Twitter.
I already do. I was supposed to
Yeah.
go, but my wife planned a trip just right overlaid over this expo.
So when's the divorce?
As a potential first timer, do you have any advice? You know, I imagine
First
they're gonna have some
timers?
tips. Yeah.
Train your liver early. No, it's just, here's the thing. It's so funny that people will come and say, "Oh, I was scared to go talk to Marcus Grant or Bob Harris or one of the big names."
Right.
And they're all the same as us. They just love to have fun. They love to talk fantasy. They're not going to argue with you. They're not going to talk down to you. If you say, "Hey, Bob, Bob Harris, hey, I'm thinking this about this player. What are your thoughts?" He may agree, he may disagree, but either way, he's going to be very nice about it. So it's just a great time. It's kind of like I say, it's a combination of like fun family reunion, frat party, and fantasy football education, all broken out at the same time. You learn a lot. You meet a lot of fun new people. There'll be tons of pictures, videos, everything. We just have a great time. It goes very fast because we keep everybody busy nonstop. And especially those that stay out late and go run around downtown Canton, popping into bars with 3 people in it and then 40 guys walk in the door. That's fun. It's just a good time. So,
it is a good time.
If you can make it, please make it.
Yeah, please come on down. I think too, sometimes people worry about like, well, I don't have a ticket or I don't know if there's room. There's always room to come on down. There's plenty of stuff too that isn't even like official, but you can just kind of walk around and hang out and then make a decision at the moment if you want to come in. Like, you don't have to do everything. I think the other thing I tell people too is like, I would try to plan as little as you can in a sense. Like, don't overbook yourself if you're coming. Just kind of go with the flow as a first timer is always what I say. Just because I know it was tough for me my first year. I didn't really plan anything, but I was like, well, I don't know who I'm going to hang out with. I don't know who I'm going to see. And it went by in a blink. And I'm like, man, am I glad I didn't have stuff scheduled that I had to leave what I was doing. Like it's sort of like internet in person, as you would imagine. It's just it's a fun time. And I know it's one of my favorite weekends of the whole year, if not my number one weekend of the whole year. So I'm very excited. I'm only about 4 hours away. So I'm very excited to make that drive up on Friday morning, like I did last year. Meet and hang out with a bunch of friends, hang out with a bunch of people, meet new friends. And, actually the best thing about it is getting to know people who you've had maybe some very passionate debates with on the internet and just kind of get to know them as a person and get a beer with them. Right. I think sometimes too, the thing that makes me the most happy is seeing everybody come together for the one cause of fantasy football and seeing us all in the same room. And yet still everybody argues the entire weekend and we love it. It's such
and nobody hates each other. We all hug.
It's the best kind of division I've ever seen. Like everybody's just there to say, no, I think Roshan Johnson's the guy in Chicago. Oh, no, I don't think so. I think it's DeAndre Swift. Like, it doesn't matter, man. We're just here to have fun. It's a great time. And Canton, Ohio is a great spot for it. Obviously, with the Hall of Fame game tonight and everything that's going on there, it's a great kind of kickoff to the season, and it's a terrific kickoff to the fantasy season. So, again, I just want to make sure we got some of that out there early and often during this podcast. I'm sure we'll talk about it throughout. There are some news items, and we talked about this a little bit before going live. There are some injuries in training camp. We don't generally break news. That's not what this show is for. I think a lot of times the only thing we really do break is when things happen live on the show, when somebody's playing a Thursday night game or, somebody throws a touchdown like Davis Mills to, was it Keegan Cantor? I don't even know his name.
Cantoriano.
He's better than I am on the depth. Even in Dynasty, I don't roster him anywhere, so that's entertaining. But still, I think that the fact that football is on is a good thing. Like the fact that we're back, this is it. It's official now. Even if they're backups, I don't care. I do not care. It's going to be a great time. But there are some injuries. I mean, I think most people have heard about Deonta Foreman's injury. We don't know how bad that is. DeAndre Hopkins is an injury. They said 4 to 6 weeks with I think it was a leg injury, a knee injury or something, right? So, and I'm sure there will be others, I knock on wood. We don't want it. We don't look for that. We don't cheer it on, but it's part of the game. And it's something that, if you've been playing this game a while, you kind of I wouldn't hate to say it, but you kind of expect that you're going to get some of those. Outside of injuries, though, is there anything that you guys have seen or any other blurbs or drum beats that you've been kind of interested in or getting to know more in the offseason? Tommy, I'll go to you first. Is there anything that stands out so far?
Not really. We're just ramping up. 2 things real quick, though. While you're at the Expo, go check out Sunday Dreamers Club. Casey Kasem, fellow DAP member, and Fantasy Cares. I joined one of the live streams just last week, and they were doing giveaways, but not in the type that you would assume. you got to pick the food bank in which $1,000 or $1,500 even were donated. So jump in some of those streams while it's still slow, before all these injuries mount up. What about you though, Bob? What are you noticing this time of year?
Well, like you said, Scott Fish Bowl live drafts are all done, so that was a lot of fun. Andrew and I got to hang out again, because we hang out all the time. It's either Columbus, Cincinnati, or Canton, one of the two.
Can't get rid of ourselves, yeah.
We can't. Yeah, my wife's like, "Who are you married to?" Anyway,
Mine too.
Yeah, right, exactly. And the one thing that's been really intriguing to me, living in, of course, Northeast Ohio, is I keep hearing how great Nick Chubb is looking on the field, off the field, cutting, running, lifting. And yet every time I go into podcasts and I bring up the fact that I've been drafting Chubb as like my running back 3 or 4 in a lot of leagues, they're all like, why would you waste the time? He's not coming back. He's not, he'll be lucky if he plays. And I'm like, I don't think you know who Nick Chubb is.
Yeah, he's back,
Nick
baby.
Chubb is a beast, and he is busting his ass to get onto that field. Now, I'm not saying he plays a full season at all, but it would not surprise me if he plays 12 games. And if you would get Nick Chubb 12 games, even at 80% Nick Chubb, I'll take it. Especially when you're drafting him with people like Deonta Foreman or Jerome Ford or, one of those kind of backups,
Yeah.
That's the one thing I've just been like, okay, maybe I'm wrong. But, where I'm drafting him, it's not going to crush my team if he doesn't play. Like, it's not like I'm drafting him in the first round like last year where you got, you basically your season was practically lost if you had him. But I just feel like, man, I keep hearing so many good things that I want to believe. And I just seem like Chubb's the kind of guy that, like, he's going to fight. He's not going to.
I think so too. Yeah, and I've got
especially if the Browns are competitive. If they start off, 4-1, and then it's ready for him to come back. He's going to do everything he can to come back and make that team even better.
Yeah, I've got Chubb on a couple of teams. There was one where I traded a 24th third for Nick Chubb in a 1 QB league, and I was just like, right when he got hurt, right? And I was like, I'll take it for a third. Like, Chubb's a beast. And now he's coming back, and it looks like he might not play in the beginning of the season, which I didn't expect anyway. But even if he's 80% of himself by week 6, that's a steal to me. Like, that's better than a 3rd round pick all day, every day. So
I will say lower leg injuries can be problematic. I used to be a distance runner, an ultra marathoner, and I had a pretty terrible leg injury. And it wasn't moving forward that was a problem. It was moving laterally in short bursts that became a real issue for me. And it made me stop playing things like soccer, ultimate frisbee, those types of games where you had to change direction quickly. And so I think the proof is really going to be in the pudding when he's trying to move laterally. Lifting weights is great. Running in a straight line, awesome. Really happy for the dude, rooting for him. But I think the jury is still out on this one.
Yeah, and I've got in that same league I traded for him. I'm trying to work a deal where I send Deebo Samuel and Nick Chubb for Saquon Barkley. And I'm just like, and he's like, I don't know, I want to see more on Chubb. He's like a little hesitant, and I'm like, I get that, but he's the extra piece. You know what I mean? Like, Deebo is the main piece of this puzzle, and Barkley, I get, is getting older and on a new team. There's some question marks there. I mean, if Ayuk were to get moved, Deebo's value would go up, I would think. So, like, and that's kind of where there's so much speculation on all 3 pieces in that trade. But that's kind of what I love about that, is that Chubb, I think, has a really high ceiling and a really low floor, right? He could be nothing. And to Tommy's point, he may not be the same, but he could be back to Nick Chubb and a running back too, and by the end of the year again. Maybe not for Dynasty, but definitely as a scoring potential kind of thing. So I'm excited about that too. I think that's a great pick. Let's kind of move on then to like the meat of our show. Well, before we do the meat, before we get into the consistency, Bob, you mentioned this before the show. You and I had a trade offer that we had talked about in one of our Dynasty leagues that we're in together. And I thought this would be an interesting time to discuss it because you mentioned it was close. There have been some pieces of news on at least one of the players. I'll discuss the trade and we'll see which side Tommy prefers, and then we'll talk about it from there. So
we won't tell him which team is which.
We won't tell him which team. So it's a 12-team Superflex Dynasty, right? Okay. One side has Jared Goff, Joe Mixon, and Mark Andrews. So Goff, Mixon, and Andrews. And the other side has Justin Herbert, Keenan Allen, Rashad Bateman, and Pat Freiermuth. So Herbert, Allen, Bateman, Freiermuth for Goff, Mixon, and Andrews. What do you think, Tommy? Which side seems to be your gut reaction there?
What is the tight end premium?
No,
1.5, I think. No,
Oh,
is
it
it
is
1.2 or
1.5,
something?
you're right.
It's not much. It's not much.
Yeah, it's
Minimal
1.5.
tight end premium. Oh my gosh, especially with Justin Herbert getting injured. That's one that maybe we glossed over. We're not sure the severity. It's supposed to be pretty short term, though, if I remember correctly. Goff, Mixon, and Andrews. So what are you doing? You're building in some short-term stability at quarterback with Goff. Mixon, he's in the meat grinder of the running back position. He's probably like a 4 to 12 week bet this season. That's really all you can expect from running backs of his age. Mark Andrews, my most rostered and maybe favorite Dynasty asset. So
He's a good one.
Yeah, that's the keystone to me is Andrews on that side.
Mm-hmm.
Herbert,
But aren't
really
you worried about Andrews' age and health?
No, I'm not worried at all about that. I
It's a
don't
tight
think
end.
Andrews is injury prone over anyone else. I think that this is a little bit of recency bias with his current value, especially at the tight end position, which at the very top is the most productive and repeatable. And then beyond that, it gets kind of messy really quickly. 28 is not old. 29 is not old. 32 is not old. So I think we've got multiple years of runway. And if we're being totally honest about our dynasty leagues, how long can we honestly expect them to last? I mean, 10 years is a good long run in dynasty. Let's just focus on the next 4 and we'll figure it out from there at the tight end position, because there's a lot of young guys right now. And if we got 4 years out of Andrews, we could move into the next cast, at that point and trade a first and a second for them. My lean is probably on the Herbert side, just because getting that quarterback in Superflex is a huge challenge. And if there's one player that could lose a ton of value at the quarterback, I think it probably could be Jared Goff. I'm not as big a believer. He's sort of in the middle ground right now of analytics guys love him, film guys love him, but he's just a mediocre quarterback. I think that's what he's always been, probably what he always will be. It's not a bad thing. I don't mean it as an insult, but he doesn't have the ceiling potential of Justin Herbert. And I think in a couple of years, you could really see Justin Herbert reestablish himself as the elite quarterback, one of the top very few handful that is a difference maker. I kind of like leaning that way.
So you're saying that because you're assuming in 2 to 3 years, Jim Harbaugh will be fired because he stinks as an NFL coach.
Maybe.
And they'll let Herbert go back to being Herbert again and not hand the ball off Herbert to whoever's in the backfield.
His floor feels like QB 15, and he's QB 17 in expert consensus rankings right now. I just don't see the risk in him.
Well, that is the side that Bob currently had, and he turned it down. He had the Justin Herbert side. I was trying to send him Andrews and Goff and Mixon. That league is the OHFF league, the Ohio Fantasy League, that we just did the rookie draft live a couple of weeks ago. It feels like now, back in June, but now it wasn't that long. But it was one of those two where I just feel like I wanted to shake things up a little bit. I like Andrews a lot. I actually like Goff a lot, and I like Mixon a lot. So I was like, well, let me try to get somebody that I think is good for all three of those. And I felt like getting somebody like a Herbert to anchor my team. I definitely need that on that team. And then adding some depth pieces that might pan out, but might not. I was like, yeah, it's worth the Flyers to me. So I think maybe there's something we can still do there, Bob. Maybe there's a piece I can add to balance that out. Maybe we can figure out an option there. But I appreciate your insights, Tommy. That's pretty much where my head was at and why I wanted the Herbert side and why Bob wanted to keep the Herbert side. So we're kind of all on the same page valuation-wise.
Right.
Thought it would be interesting to talk about. I think it's pretty good because you hit the nail on the head with a lot of that. I will say I'm higher on Goff than most. I think the Lions this year are going to be pretty good. I think they may be one of the better teams, if not one of the best teams, if you want to put it that way, in the NFC. I think obviously the Niners are going to go back. I think they're going to have a good playoff run. There's a couple other teams that could get a little scary depending on their division and how they squeak out of there. But I just think the Lions look ready to do it and ready to go. And I think Goff's going to have a hell of a year. So again, being a dynasty trade team, the age is a little bit older for Goff, but the production could be higher this year. And I'm not necessarily.
But he's only 29.
I know. I say age like it matters, but yeah. But I'm still saying, like, there are people that look at that a lot and say, well, that's 3 years. And, there's the whole thing. I get that. But I'm also looking at it like Goff is probably going to be in the league about the same time as Herbert, in my opinion. And I mean, it's hard to say. But again, we're thinking 4 years. I think Goff's there for 4 years. I don't think there's any real risk.
Yeah. I mean, unless something drastic happens, if they continue to put weapons around him, like St. Brown, and they've got Laporta, who's obviously very young.
Love Laporta.
Yep.
You know, if Jameson Williams can do something. I mean, like I said, it was close. Like I was like, you know, and so my number one quarterback on my team is Josh Allen.
Right. And that's why I targeted the Herbert guy, because I was like, you know, you can technically take a little hit at Herbert. He wasn't your QB1. I mean, right. I have a hard time believing anybody would put Herbert over Goff, right? Or over Allen. I mean, like that makes no sense. Right. But I think that's where it seemed like you might need some running back depth too, where you've got Barkley and Khalil Herbert, and that's about it. And so it's like there is some logic.
We only have to start one running back.
Correct. So there is some logic there in saying you might want to have more, but you don't need them in this league, which is another fun wrinkle. But again, I just think that there's, you know, it's one of those, it makes us both better, but maybe not enough for you. Totally get it. And we can, again, we're not done. We can revisit this. We'll figure out an option. So then with that in mind, then let's kind of move ahead to our main topic for the night. And obviously Bob is here to talk about consistency. If you've never heard of Bob Lung and aren't familiar with his work in the world of consistency, he puts out I would say it's an award-winning book, right? I mean, it's won stuff.
You can't say that because it was in 2018.
Yeah, FSWA, right? Wasn't it the FSWA?
Yeah, so FSWA. I've been nominated 7 straight years as one of the best publications, fantasy football printed publications, and won the award in 2018. But the fact that every year when I am nominated, I'm going against CBS Sports, NBC Sports, Fantasy Life, you know, people with a lot of money to put in books. And I'm doing this on the side while I have a full-time job. So the fact that I'm even nominated, to me, like I said, is a win every year, in my opinion. Don't even have to
completely agree. And I've gotten it a couple of years, and it does come in handy. I do enjoy reading it and kind of looking at the way that works. So consistency is obviously, I wouldn't say it's a hot topic. It's not quite exciting enough to be a hot topic, but it can be, my goodness, sorry. But it can be a little bit of a contestable one, as in like, how valuable is it? And like, what does it mean? And how do you measure it? So I thought maybe we just have like an open discussion about it, because I think that there is maybe some misunderstandings or miscommunication about what it is. And then also maybe some misapplications of how to use it. Right. And I think consistency is definitely something I think we're all looking for, but also knowing boom and bye weeks or boom and bust weeks can be helpful too, to say, hey, you know, this guy isn't consistent. Maybe that's somebody I want to target. You know, not being consistent isn't necessarily a bad thing per se, but there is some value in being and not being consistent. So I think that the easiest way to start with this, Bob, just to clarify and get people on the same page, how do you use consistency? How do you measure it? What is your thought process and how you came up with your metrics in a sense? And then how does that apply to Dynasty?
So the calculation is basically trying to determine, based on the scoring method, and we'll just go with straight 4 points passing touchdown and 1 point PPR, that each week you want your players, starting players, to earn enough points to be qualified to be in the top 12 quarterbacks and tight ends, top 24 running backs, top 36 receivers, in that kind of format. Again, when you add flexes, it all gets a little jumbled. Just staying with very straightforward. For quarterbacks, that is about 18 to 20 points. Last year was 18 and a half, lowest we've ever had. Running backs, wide receivers, because it's PPR, are pretty even. They're about 10 and 11 points over that. And then tight ends are about 8 to 9, depending on the year. You get over that amount, you're in a clutch game. The more clutch games, the more consistent you are. So if you're 100% consistent, that means you exceeded that every week. Believe it or not, that doesn't happen very often. Last year, we actually had 2. We had McCaffrey and Tyreek Hill, who were 16 out of 16 both, because they both missed 1 game. But it's very rare. So the idea is that by looking at those people's numbers, you can say, you know, if you're just looking at total points and you go, well, look, Lamar Jackson with 4th in total points, so he should be the 4th quarterback off the board. And I will say to you, yeah, but he was 63% consistent last year, which ranked him 12th amongst all of the quarterbacks, which means that in a little over a third of the games last year that he played, he was under 18 and a half points, which means he wasn't worthy of being in the top 12 quarterbacks on those weeks. Therefore, may have hurt you that you didn't make the playoffs, even though you had him. And if you didn't make the playoffs, then you missed out on his big run at the end. Therefore, the consistency hurt you. So that's kind of in a nutshell how it all comes together. And just like everything, just because you look at a number doesn't mean that they're, it tells the whole story. There's stuff behind it.
Yep.
But I break that down too in like, their second half consistency versus their first half, home versus away, all those kind of things come into play. But the book really breaks that down in all the player profiles.
Yeah, no, I love that. So Tommy, have you done any research on consistency, or like, I know that I put down on the sheet that you're somewhat skeptical. I think that's a fair way to put it. Maybe I'm wrong here, but what is your thought process on consistency, and where do you stand on the discussion?
Yeah, I think I equate consistency to like a collar and a leash on a dog. The dog is your team, right? So if you don't put a collar and a leash on the dog, it kind of runs around and does whatever it's going to do. So it's a process, it's a strategy. My question and skepticism is that the optimal lens in which to build your team, in which to construct and measure starts and sits? Because I have thoughts around whether or not consistency leads to wins, to success. I have questions around the nonlinear relationship around weekly scoring, how the top scorer, especially at like running back and wide receiver, you can get like 45-point weeks at the very top, whereas the running back 12 or the wide receiver 12 can have like 16 points. And so being at the very top really matters. And so measuring top 12 or top 6 is sometimes mythologizing something that maybe is a bit of a false narrative. I'm not saying that that's what you're purporting, Bob. I'm saying that digging deeper within the data, you can look and say, what did that 45 points give me 3 weeks? Did that lead to a win? What is the difference between a win and a loss in my given leagues? I looked into that and found out that last year across all my leagues, I had 18 last year. It was about 11.5 points was the delta between a win and a loss, for the good teams, the bad teams, the mediocre. And so how much am I hurt by, let's say, rostering a player like, I don't know, George Kittle? I think he's seen as a very inconsistent player. And I would agree with that. I looked at the Fantasy Pros breakdown of weekly scoring at all the different positions. And I used a slightly different metric. I used over 9 points per game and under 9 points per game, as well as over 20 points per game. And among the top 6 tight ends, you're right, George Kittle, he was the most inconsistent. He had 7 games under 9 points per game. But you know what? He was the top guy at getting over 20 points per game. And so when I get those boom weeks, should I be seeking those out? Because if I have, more or less than 9 points, I'm sort of flirting with that threshold of a win and a loss anyway. That's my margin for error, my standard deviation. Those boom games, however, can push me well above that median expectation. And that one player can elevate me to a win, which to me matters quite a bit more.
No, I hear that. And I think some of this too, and to what Bob even was saying, like it's meant to be used as a tool, not an arbiter of truth, right? Like this isn't meant to say like consistency is the best and you have to be consistent. It's more like it can be helpful to decide on start sits, especially if you've got a lot of risky players. Maybe you want to go, which one of these 2 options is more consistent and I can guarantee a little bit of a stronger floor because I've got a lot of ceiling plays elsewhere. And maybe I just want to make sure I get my bases covered here. Or the opposite, right? Where you're like, my team's kind of boring. Which guy can I put in here that is the least consistent, so to speak? That maybe not terribly consistent, as in like 0% chance, but like which one of these is maybe the riskier play with the higher ceiling? Maybe that's who I put in my flex this week. So that's kind of where I think the argument sometimes, and I think Bob nailed it on the head there too. It's not meant to say this is the only true fact, right? And it's not meant to say either that like consistency is all that matters. But I say all the time, I think that, and maybe this is just a feeling more than stats at this point, but I like to think that floor will get you to the playoffs, but you need ceiling to win the title. Like, you know what I mean? Like you can't do it without both. And sometimes even having a ceiling throughout the season, boom or bust can be great. You can ride high, you can kind of get in there and squeak in. But then if you're, busting at the wrong time, or your guys get injured or they just don't perform in the right time of year, it doesn't matter how much planning you did. It just didn't work out. Right. So I think one of the main questions that I've heard when it comes to consistency, and Bob, you and I think have talked about this even, how much of it is predictable? Like how much of it is sticky? Like, can you tell that, Kittle was unpredictable last year. Is he going to be unpredictable again? Or is that just kind of like a look back at the data as opposed to a way to predict the next data point?
I mean, I think with anything, looking at historical numbers certainly has value, but looking forward, you have to say to yourself, well, what has changed for that team? Now, for the 49ers, let's say Ayuk stays. Okay. So what changes do we have? We have very little. We still have Debo. We still have Ayuk. We have Kittle. We have McCaffrey. We have Purdy. Offensive line certainly has a little bit in that, but nothing much has changed. Now, look at George Kittle's last 3 seasons, 56%, 60%, 57%. Looks pretty predictable to me. If I'm looking at George Kittle, I'm like, he's been top, 3rd, 4th, and 5th in total points the last 3 years. So as Tommy said, he's that boom bust guy, but he's at least, and the funny thing is, even at 56, 60, and 57%, he ranks top 12. So one, tight ends suck at consistency overall.
Nailed it.
So, if you can get a kid, that's why a Travis Kelce and Laporta and Andrews, when healthy, demands being picked up early.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't suck to have a guy that's at least 60% or more. So Kittle is still worthy of being on your team as a top 12 tight end, both in total points and consistency. Just don't expect a lot out of that to really help your team, like a Kelce or a Laporta or, somebody else that are moving up. Now, you look at a kid like Dalton Kincaid, who was 56% consistent, pretty much there side by side with Kittle. Now, where do we see him at? Because what we see moving forward is a team that's decimated at the wide receiver position. And now Kincaid looks like he will be the focus. Obviously, you look at that and you go, well, pretty good opening season. The kid was top 12 in total points and consistency. And he's got all of these targets that have been abandoned by Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis, etc. Now, he's not going to get them all, but he's probably going to get a lot more than he did in the prior year. So those are the kind of things. I always say that the consistency guide is the French fries of the Happy Meal. You're going to go to your main site, whether it's Guru Elite or, Fantasy Life or ESPN or whatever you like for your hamburger, right?
Yeah.
Then go buy the consistency guide for your French fries. And then when you sit down at your meal and you're trying to decide between this player and that player and this player, and you're trying to look at your rankings and all that, just take a glance at the French fries for a minute to see if, like, 2 guys you got really close, maybe not that close in consistency, and make that adjustment. Like you said, I will never say the consistency guy is going to get you a title, but I will say it has a better chance of getting you to the playoffs. And correct me if I'm wrong, it's kind of hard to win the title if you don't make the playoffs. So that's what every year, my goal is not to, it is to win the title. My goal is how many of the teams that I'm playing, how many leagues, my 20, 25, make the playoffs. Not win titles, make the playoffs. My goal is 60, easily 2/3 to 70% is my goal. Now, I've hit it, but I've also missed. But that to me means the consistency is working because I'm getting to the playoffs. Then I hope my team continues that success. And yes, at that point, it's all, no holds barred. You hope, I've walked into championship games with team loaded from top to bottom and got beat by, Ryan Fitzpatrick and, 2 backup running backs and a 3rd string tight end. Shit happens. But the goal is I at least got there and had that opportunity. And if you miss the playoffs by a couple games every year and you're always in the upper half of scoring, you may just be drafting inconsistent players. That's all I'm asking you to do is look at this book and go, oh, yeah, this guy is usually pretty inconsistent. Maybe I should stay away from him. That's all.
Any thoughts on that, Tommy?
Yeah, I think it's important to keep a focus on the most important factors in winning. And I think all play is pretty reflective of that. Jordan McNamara did a study where he looked at the R-squared, or the correlation of total points scored versus your all play record. And he found a 95% correlation, which means like 95% of the time, the total number of points that you score in your lineup accounts for your all play record. And it was about 75% to head-to-head wins, because sometimes you just run into a really tough schedule throughout the regular season. You're playing really strong opponents, whatever. Sometimes you just get bad luck. But I want to focus on the all play and focusing on total points as my primary metric of success, because I agree, you can't win the championship unless you make the playoffs. A 95% correlation is really strong to me. I don't particularly care when those points come or who they come from, because I'm personally bad at predicting when those consistent players will actually become consistent, because it doesn't overlay year over year at some of the positions, especially at wide receiver, especially at running back. And so if we're to talk about a roster build, I want to have as few wide receivers as possible, because I don't want to have to fight against consistency or inconsistency. I just want to start the same 4 every week, because the very best wide receivers still have 4 quote unquote bad weeks, which is between 25 and 33% of the season. Like, that's a significant chunk. Those are the best receivers. So just start the same guys every week and ride the ebbs and flows, because they're all going to hit, they're all going to miss, and just take a total package of points from the inconsistent positions, because we don't know when touchdowns are going to be scored. We can predict target volume, and target volume is a great thing to chase, but it's really touchdowns that create the outlier seasons. Why was Tyreek Hill so good last year? Well, he scored 13 touchdowns. I mean, that was incredible. To go with his typical crazy yards per route run, like he was over 4 this year. He had a career year, but it was touchdowns that really pushed him into a different stratosphere. We're not good at predicting that. And so we're not good at predicting consistency, in my opinion, at the very high ceiling outcomes on a weekly basis. At running back, we kind of want inconsistency, in my opinion, because we want to have access to backup running backs who are by default inconsistent. We don't start them when they're not starting. When there's an injury in front, we do want to start them. Or when we see an increasing role like Jaleel McLaughlin last year for, I don't know, he had like a 4-week run and the signals were there. You could start him for a few weeks. So that is inconsistency in my framing. And it's something that is worthy of chasing. At tight end, I can't predict week over week. I try to predict who's going to be good, but we don't really know aside from Travis Kelce. Yeah. And so it's just a variable position. And quarterback, I think that JJ Zacharyson and Denny Carter do a really good job on the Living the Stream podcast, where they have to take a guy that's pretty low rostered. I think like under 50%. I don't quote me on that, but they have to stream a quarterback every week, and they pick one. And if that rostership goes up above that threshold, they can no longer stream that quarterback. And they reproduce like the QB 13 every year. So I think there's some value in inconsistency there, because they're not choosing the same quarterback every time. They're pulling from the depths.
Well, and it's trying to go against matchups and other factors, players that are, what single starts like Tyrod Taylor or whatever, like, so those guys sometimes get thrown in there too. I know that we did have a question that was submitted by Jeff, our guest last week, the commissioner service, yours in service. He actually asked what I think is a pretty good question for, in a way anyway, how to use this data. And maybe we can kind of use this as a way to wrap up, because I like the way that we're going with this conversation already. But which do you believe is the most difficult for maintaining strategic consistency? Is it short-term roster management, long-term roster management, week-to-week starting lineup decisions with deep rosters? Like, which of these is what you would consider the hardest thing to do, Bob? I mean, you've been doing consistency for what it feels like is longer than a lot of us have been playing.
20 years, 24 years.
So exactly. So you probably know this more than most, but like, what's the hardest thing to find as consistent, I guess? Or like, what's the thing that you feel like is the hardest thing to figure out,
I think it's the deep rosters. So one of the toughest leagues that I'm in, and we did it on purpose, is our Kings Classics, which of course Andrew will find out this year. We have 14 teams, and these are some of the biggest names in the industry. And it is 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, three wide receivers, 1 tight end, 3 flex. So now all of a sudden, your third flex in a 14-team league, if you can find somebody with a heartbeat on the waiver wire, you're starting them. If you can find any consistency out of anybody, good luck. I think that's where it makes it tough. And that's where, it is not for the faint of heart. Most people don't play in those leagues because they just aren't on top of who the 4-string running back for the Browns are this week that I need to get into my flex because I don't have any other breathing bodies available. So that's what makes that tough. Short term, long term. I mean, we talked about this being about Dynasty.
Yeah. And how do we use this in Dynasty? Like, what? I know that there's obviously some logic in drafting and weak decisions, but does this ever seem to make a decision change for you, or does it like swing the needle one way or the other for Dynasty at all?
So what I've been doing so far, which I'm sure you've noticed, Andrew, is I don't hold a lot of love for rookies. I don't hold a lot of love for draft picks. So if I can get somebody who has shown some consistency, either second half of last year or, moving towards this, I might take advantage of that knowledge that I have that others don't and say, now might be the time to make a trade for this guy because maybe they didn't notice. Now, they may notice a great second half total points, obviously, if they were starting them. But maybe I see something like maybe it's the last 3 games of the year with a new quarterback, and now that new quarterback has the starting role. So I'm going to use, especially like in the profile where it has the consistent clutch games by week, and I can go, when this guy was quarterback and this guy was playing receiver in weeks 5, 6, and 8, they clicked. Now we're moving it. So I just use that stuff as kind of my gauge to make some picks. And on the other side, I might look at somebody who's like, their consistency in the second half was not very good. Maybe I should trade them off. And I've done that too. Yep. I traded Javonte Williams away a couple years ago. I don't know if it was right after the injury or right before the injury. I don't remember. It was close, but I was like, I'm not even going to wait for this guy to kick in. I'm just going to move on. And so far it's been okay because I think I got a first round pick for him or something pretty good because at the time everybody's like, oh, it's Javonte Williams. So that's how I've used the consistency is just using that knowledge and that data that I have in front of me on a weekly basis to kind of go, this guy seems to be trending the right direction. Maybe it's time to, trade for him because he's been on this guy's bench for the last 2 or 3 weeks. And maybe they haven't noticed that person's been scoring between 12 and 15 points because it's not sexy. It's not the 28. Yeah. It's not the 35. It's 12, 15 that they're like, oh, yeah, I saw that. But, I have these 5 receivers ahead of him, so I'm not going to play him. He might be beneficial to me for the future or for the current, depending on how my team is. So that's how I've used it in the past.
I like that. And I think, too, honestly, like we sort of said this earlier, I think it might have been before we started recording, but Dynasty becomes redraft, right? You want to go win it. And I think that's
I want to win every year. I've never played for 3 years now.
Yeah, sometimes people start getting too bent around the axle and they're just like thinking about it too much. And they're like, man, I'm building a great team for next year. Why not go win it now, right? Like, what are we doing here? Right. And we'll actually, foreshadowing, we'll talk about that with our FMAT tonight. But I think, too, it's one of those things that if you've got the right build and you've got the right roster construction, in my mind, you should have consistent and inconsistent players on your team. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. You don't need to be super consistent and boring, but you don't need to be super inconsistent and shooting for the moon. It's all about finding that right balance. And you might have a different kind of formula in your head or on your sheet or in your world than other people do, right? You might say, hey, I like a little risk. I like it being for fun, and something I know we've mentioned before is that this game is meant to be a little chaotic. That's what makes it exciting. Going into a matchup where you're projected to lose by 20 and winning by 10, that's a great feeling. On the other end, it sucks to have that happen to you and lose, right? But if it was all predictable, if it was all consistency was everything, then what would be the point of playing?
If somebody knew all the answers, then they're not doing these podcasts. They're in Vegas winning a lot of money.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And if that was true, I still feel like they would be bragging about it on Twitter because that's really the only reason it exists anymore. But anyway,
you screw up because then somebody know your secret. But
but thank you for that, Tommy and Bob. I think both of you provided some good insights there. I think that there's a lot to be said for consistency. And again, just in case people missed it or we didn't clarify, what's the name of your guide? I think it's pretty obvious, but just to be clear, where can they find it and all that?
2024 Fantasy Football Consistency Guide. Get it on Amazon. If you're a Prime member, you'll get it in 2 days. So you can literally order it today and have it for a Sunday draft.
Yeah, and I know we had Vegas Jeff here in the chat was like, I need to buy it because he didn't win it in Cincy. Because of course, yes, Bob, you were giving those away at all the Scott Fishbowl drafts. I think you put them in.
I was, yeah. So yeah, a lot of new readers and
there's
really
Jeff saying he just bought it, so he went ahead and did it. I think that's a smart move. Again, I'm a huge fan of it. I think it comes in handy. I wouldn't say it's something I keep by my nightstand and read every day, but I love referring to it when I'm trying to make a decision or when. Well, I mean, I love you, Bob, but let's be honest. That's
I mean,
but I still think there's some value there.
Sure. That's not one of them.
Yeah, go ahead, Tommy.
I will say, whether or not you advocate for or don't care about consistency at all, your league mates do. I threw a poll up leading up to this podcast.
Yes.
Just asking, do you weigh a player's consistency when considering a trade in your Dynasty league? 40% of the 90 votes said no, 60% said yes. So the majority of your league is thinking about this in some way. So if you just say, no, this doesn't matter, you're ignoring potential trade opportunities, potential leverage opportunities. You should be paying attention to things, especially if you disagree with them. Bingo. I think this is a great read. I don't personally ascribe to some of the things, but others I absolutely do. And so it's a good idea to look at differing opinions all the time. Like, don't get in your little bubble. Look at these other opinions, look at these other philosophies and strategies and learn them, at the very least, to beat your opponents.
I love it. Big fan. All right, so we'll move on to our. We only had one trade this week, but again, this is still the quieter part of the season. I think people are starting to come back around. We did have one trade this week in the Dynasty Junkies 1, the OG league, which is awesome. It was between the Junkies, myself and Rocky, and Jerry Shea. So Jerry Shea gave up Brandon Ayuk and Pat Freiermuth, and the Junkies got Chris Godwin and George Kittle. Tommy, I'll go to you first. You seem to be smiling and laughing. I don't know which side wins this, because I was looking at this when I sent this trade. Like, I don't have enough Ayuk shares. I've got way too much Kittle, and we were just talking about tight end being inconsistent. Part of me was like, I just want to get some more, charisma on my roster. I need to rizz it up, and I thought Ayuk would be to do that.
You get charisma points. I've never played in a league with charisma points,
but it's all about the vibes when I'm clicking those boxes. What do you think, Tommy?
Did you say Rocky was your co-manager?
Correct. Yes.
He and I agree on literally nothing.
I know. It's awesome.
I think Chris Godwin is entirely undervalued, underappreciated. I think he's a perfectly fine wide receiver 3, even a wide receiver 2 in some lineups, like perfectly startable. And George Kittle is one of my favorite NFL players. And he has those ceiling outcomes like we discussed earlier. Brandon Ayuk is a very good wide receiver. Pat Freiermuth has a lot of opportunity in front of him, it seems, especially because Malachi Corley got hurt. And so it's George Pickens and Pat Freiermuth, and that's about it besides the running backs. That said, I'm leaning pretty heavily to the Godwin and Kittle side, and maybe it's just the fact that I have bias towards Kittle that's anchoring me there. So why don't you sort me out, Bob? Which side do you prefer?
Well, I assume it's Dynasty, right?
It is. Yep.
I mean, Godwin's, is he 30 now?
28, I think.
Oh, is he only 28?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought he was older.
28. Yep.
Okay. All right. So he's younger than I thought. Ayuk is only a little 24.
He's 26. Yeah. He's
really
a young kid either. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So first off, I suck at how old these people are.
Well, that's why you write it all down.
Ayuk was like 24, and I thought Godwin was closer to 30. So I'm like, oh yeah, I get this. Obviously, Andrew has a man crush for Freiermuth because it was in that trade that he was trying to do.
I do. I think Freiermuth's got a lot of upside. Yeah,
totally.
I think this is fair from a dynasty standpoint. I don't know if there's a winner or loser on this one. I think that's because I think you've got things that have to fall into place. Now, granted, if you're looking for the safest side, then you're going Godwin and Kittle because you know what you're getting there. So from a consistency standpoint, I probably would jump all over the Godwin and Kittle because I'm like, oh yeah, I know what I'm getting there. I know what to expect from them. I know what their floor is, but neither one of them really have high ceilings. Godwin will get you 12 to 15 points a week, and that's perfect. Like you said, is your wide receiver 3.
Yep.
Kittle is 60% consistent every year. Ayuk was 82% last year. One of the better, an up and coming. And if he gets traded to somebody where he's the wide receiver 1, or if he stays in San Francisco, he's probably going to match those numbers again this year. So you've got a higher upside than Godwin. Freiermuth could be top 10 this year. Again, there's nothing else in Pittsburgh to throw to.
Yeah.
The bad side of that is there's nothing else in Pittsburgh to throw to.
Yeah. Well,
so they double team
Pickens is
Pickens and double
still,
team Fryermuth.
Yeah.
They're just throwing it to somebody on the sidelines.
Schrodinger's tight end.
Yeah.
And Tommy, I think you said Malachi Corley, but you meant Roman Wilson, right?
I'm sorry. My bad. Yeah. Sorry.
I do that all the time. Just want to clarify. If anyone's listening and screaming at their iPod, we did catch it, I swear.
My bad.
And on the other side of that, we have Arthur Smith at coach.
But he's not the head coach.
You know how much he loves using second tight ends just to piss off your Kyle Pitts owners. So we put in Jonnu Smith. So that could be a mess. So I think it's pretty even. I would probably lean towards the Godwin Kittle side again, because I know what I'm getting, but there's a lot higher ceiling on the other duo. They could both blow up. Well, if Kittle or if Ayuk just stays where he was from last year, that's fine. And then if Fryermuth can, match Kittle's numbers, you're getting more out of that.
Like a wash. Yeah. So the main thought process here too is our other tight end in this league is TJ Hawkinson, which is obviously Rocky's a big fan of the Hawk. And so the other thought was like, I don't mind having Kittle and Hawk, don't get me wrong, but in theory, Hawkinson should come back. I think that offense will be pretty good. So I think we're okay at tight end. And our receivers, we had Waddle, Pittman, and then Godwin was our third. And then Hollywood Brown and Romeo Doubs, it falls off a cliff. So our thought was like, well, let's bolster up that wide receiver a little bit for buys. I think even with the 2-year difference, I don't think age is a big deal thing, but it is helpful to go younger there. And obviously younger at the tight end spot too, right? Fryermuth's only 25 and Kittle's 30. So it's kind of like, looking at our roster and what we were trying to build, we wanted to be a little bit more durable at a receiver than tight end. We've got a win now roster. I think we can go put it together and make it happen, but it's going to take some luck as always. But I was kind of like, I want to go get some Ayuk. And if we trade Kittle, that we were trading one Niner for another, it makes it a little bit easier in your mind to, not have both. So I thought it was a pretty fair trade, and I appreciate your insights both. I think that was kind of where our heads were at too. And I'm glad that you both disagreed with us. That's perfect. It's the way it should be. So our last segment of the evening is our famous and our friendly Find Me a Trade. And I got to play the song because I love the song.
Find me a trade.
Thank you, Brian Haar. I will be finding a trade. So this week's Find Me a Trade comes from Mark at Huff 897-28037. I love numbers in Twitter handles. That is my favorite thing. The team name is Huffman, and the league is Degenerates Anonymous. It is a 12-team Superflex, single PPR for running back and receiver, 1.75 for tight end. It is a start 11 in a 12-team, so you're starting pretty deep, not terribly deep, but deep enough. You got 1 QB, 2 running back, 3 receiver, 1 tight end, 3 flex, like Bob was mentioning for Kings Classic, but then they add that obvious Superflex. I'm not going to bother bringing up the roster or anything. I think we can kind of read through it real quick. And then actually, why don't I do that? And then Tommy, you can read his comments. But so his team is, and maybe let's read the comments first, because I think the comments explain a lot of this. So Tommy, if you wouldn't mind, can you read those comments for us?
Yeah. So it's a new league. The startup was in February of this year. One team is a pretty heavy favorite, according to the manager's opinion, with a lot of win now assets. 11 of 12 of the teams are competing. You don't typically see that. Don't see a lot of future draft capital. He's accumulated most of them. 12 future, 25 to 27 first. That's a ton. He says he still has a decent team, considering continuing to sell high while I'm the only seller, or he could make a player investment with a target of competing in 2025.
Yeah. So I would say his team is interesting. I'll start there. So
like
quarterback's
interesting.
Yeah, so he's obviously shooting for fish in a barrel and just saying, let me load up on QBs. It is a super flex, so I kind of get the logic, but he's really just going to town on these guys. He's got Kyler Murray and Trevor Lawrence, and then a bunch of backups like Tyrod Taylor, Tyson Bagent, who's playing tonight, Carson Wentz, Mac Jones backing up Trevor Lawrence, right? So he's got a bunch of those quarterback long shots just to see if any of them pull through. I love that logic in a rebuild. Like, you might as well take the guys that have the biggest delta, even if it's just for 1 week. I don't blame him for that. Running back, it's a little light. You got Elijah Mitchell, generic Prince.
That was very kind of you, sir.
Yeah, it is real weak. It's 2 running backs too, so that's going to be brutal if you try to pivot there. Receiver is looking a little better. He's got Drake London, Nico Collins, Adam Thielen. It just falls off a cliff again, right? Like, you got 2 good young guys in London and Collins, but then after that, it's ugly. And then at tight end, you've got, again, I would say another bad position, Gerald Everett, Logan Thomas, Will Dissly. So it's very clear that he traded back a lot and added first where he could. I think he's got 6 firsts in 25, and then at least 5 in 26. And that was where I cut it off because I'm like, I don't think I care anymore. That's too many. So he's clearly going for this, like, give me the draft picks and see what I can do. I don't think he's contending unless he makes some massive moves here. I just can't imagine this team winning more than 2 games by pure luck. But that also made it a very interesting league to find a trade in. I have mine on the sheet, but it was more of a thought process. And I know, Tommy, yours is very similar with a lot of different options. But why don't we go to you first, and then we'll get into mine.
Oh, yeah, happy to. So first and foremost, I hope everyone paid at least a few years in advance. When I see 11 of 12 teams trying to compete and selling picks all the way out into 2027, which is like a different eon, I'm worried there's going to be some orphans here unless this is pretty ironclad and everyone either knows each other or they've paid a significant sum of money to keep some skin in the game. Otherwise, it's going to get real messy. I don't love the balance given where we are with this team. In my opinion, this is not a pretty solid team. This is a team that has some moves to make. I'm glad that you picked a date of 2025 to compete. Whenever I see a team in this condition, I always say, like, pick a win-by date. You need to have an expiration of this rebuild so that you can sort of put yourself on the spot. Deadlines make deals, right? And so I'm a little hesitant to even offer a trade at this point because it doesn't make a lot of sense. You've missed the tight end wave. All the young guys are gone. And it's going to be tough to get into them now. And I don't know if next year is going to be a great tight end year. Quarterback, you're doing okay. I like that. But I see this as a rebuilding year, nothing but a rebuilding year. So you need to get a little bit more asymmetrical. You need to be patient. You could try to get into like Dalton Kincaid with Nico Collins because the person who has Kincaid, they also have CJ Stroud. And so if there's an injury, maybe to Kincaid, that'd be a move that you could make. But what I would do is I would be dropping quite a few of these wide receivers and a few of these tight ends as well. And I'd be getting even more backup quarterbacks. I'd go to the waiver wire and just grab everything. Use the Scott Connor approach, any QB on a 2 deep, and try to flip them for whatever you can. Keep building up that war chest, knowing you're going to have to accelerate your rebuild later. But the deal that I landed on, let's see, I don't even remember. Oh, here we go. TJ Hawkinson. I wonder if we could move Nico Collins into TJ Hawkinson. The manager who has Hawk, they seem to be competing. They have a pretty strong team. And Nico Collins, I think, has a decent amount of buzz. It was quiet for a good portion of the offseason, but now it seems to be ramping up. And the DLF ADP is suggesting that as well. So that would be my starting point, and I would be willing to add to Nico Collins to get into TJ Hawkinson. Let's get tight end sorted out. Let's just ride that injury wave of Hawkinson and say, like, next year, we're going to really be pushing hard to liquidate some of these picks, which you should be liquidating in season, some of what turn out to be later firsts for injured players, because people are going to be realizing that they need to rebuild. You're the first round pick shop. Don't trade away the early ones, trade away the late ones for injured players. You're going to find better deals in season for those injured players, even with first round picks.
Yeah, and that's actually where I was going to start too, is that I would be making waiver moves and being patient, which is tough. So when you send in a league for find me a trade and our options are don't make a trade, I hate to do that. But this is literally, I do see some of these leagues come through my DMs. I do get people that, tag me on Twitter and they have this kind of build where it's just literally all picks and they're like, what should I do? And I'm like, more of the same. I don't, what I mean? Like, you're doing a great job as it is. I think the other thing I would say is don't move your picks until you know where they are, at least have an idea of where they are. And I love the idea of going out and acquiring injured players for sure, because you don't want points this year. So go get anybody who doesn't score points this year, but is most likely going to score more points next year. I thought that was a really smart move and kind of where I was going to go with mine too. But Bob, what are your thoughts on what Tommy was going for there and on this team in general even?
How polite do I have to be?
Not at all. You can be as rude as you want to be.
I don't understand how you can have a startup draft in February and then trade all of your, I assume, good picks?
Yeah.
For the first round pick next year. Is this a strategy that I'm just completely unaware of in Dynasty? Do you see this often?
It is a strategy. It's the productive struggle or the first year punt. And it's actually interesting that you bring this up because you mentioned earlier how you're not really a fan of rookies and picks. And this would be the opposite of a strategy for you. You would hate this. This would be brutal for you. Right?
Oh, well, I wouldn't hate it if I was the guy getting the veterans, the top players that he was trading. I mean, I would be one of those first round picks that I was giving away.
Right.
I mean, this team is just brutally awful.
Well, again, if you think about it too, with the startup, it could have been trades made during the startup draft. And I think the general thought that I've been kind of hearing a lot and getting into the discussions about is the first one to decide to rebuild usually gets the best prices. So this guy decided right at the startup in year one to just say, hey, you know what? I'm going to punt. And honestly, too, it is kind of fun to be patient sometimes and kind of just let the trades come to you. And I did that when I took over the league that we're in together, in that OHFF league. I just was like, all right, give me all the injured players. And it was kind of fun to not care about scoring. And to literally, there was nothing more exciting to me than on Sunday morning checking a lineup box with like Samaje Perine and Ty Johnson. I'm like, who knows? You know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to win, but I don't care if I win. It took a lot off my brain. So I just want to say, like, this is not necessarily a common build. It's not it's not a normal way to do it. So it's like,
have you ever seen this be successful?
I have. There are actually J-Mike.
How many years did it take that team to go from that garbage to winning a title?
If you do it right and you scout the right players and you make the right moves, it can be a year. So like this 25 goal is not impossible. Yeah. And you may even recall in the league that we're in together, I took over the league, bought a whole bunch of crappy players and injured players and made it to the playoffs the next year. So, if that's all you're looking for, then that's what you can do. It depends on how you're going to do it. And I think Tommy's point should be hit on again. If this league is full of friends that are going to stick together, this is the right move. If it's a casual league with a bunch of strangers, I wouldn't do it. I mean, it's just too risky because really what you're doing is by doing these moves and making these trades, you're banking on the league being here. And if it's not here, you're out. And that's good. So my trade was on the same kind of plane of existence as Tommy's. And we'll kind of get to this and wrap it up because we are at the hour mark. But my trade was basically the same thought processes, but more on the pick side. And it would be to package to make a pick upgrade. And that's really all I would try to do here is like once Thielen starts scoring points, maybe you trade Thielen and a third for a second. Or you trade Thielen and an RB that pops in a preseason game for a second and a second for a first. One of those like see what you can do to a team that just had an injury in preseason where maybe the Deontay Foreman manager is looking for a fill-in. Well, maybe you
Rico
can send
Dotto gets red hot.
Yeah, and so like maybe you can package that with a later pick to make a better one. Because the thing you don't want to do here, and we hear this a lot too, when you have 12 picks, that's going to be 12 players on your roster. It doesn't need to be, right? You can get those. You can technically consolidate those down and get top 12 or 12 of the top 15 players or whatever, right? So like you can do a couple different moves here that make it more fun and exciting to kind of have better players. But I think the idea that both Tommy and I are hitting on here is if you're building for 25, then build for 25. Make that your goal. And I don't think you want to go further out than that, especially with it being a startup. If this was an orphan that you just took over and you're realizing, these guys all know each other and I don't, it might be 2 years, but I think you can do this in a year with the kind of assets you've got and the stockpile you've got here. Just play it slow for a year and then dominate next year. It's not the worst idea. So,
Some advice if you're in this situation, follow at Dynasty Onion. This analyst has done this. I don't know how many times. And I hate how they build teams because they do this. They strip everything down. They get a ton of picks. And then they start piecing together elite assets and they snowball it. And it takes 3 years for the Onion to do it, but it happens literally almost every time. So if you want to just like sit in someone's back pocket and learn how to do this type of strategy, which I don't advocate for, Dynasty Onion is your guy.
I would drink so much for those.
Well, you know what? Maybe that's a fun thing too, Bob, right? Just donate that league fee and just be like, hey, I'm just going to wreck my liver. It's going to be great.
And I'm just going to give all of my good players to Andrew.
Whatever it takes to have fun. There's no wrong way to play Dynasty, right? If somebody wants to do this, I'm all
I like
for
the way
it.
I'm doing it.
I like the way I do it too. And I don't usually do this, but it is fun to do one different. And I will say this too, like if you're always doing the same thing, you're probably not learning. And this can be a really fun way to go outside of your box and go crazy the other way. And maybe you can apply some things here and figure out some options and come up with some solutions that you wouldn't have normally done. So I never have a problem with going against the grain. And as I always say, Bob, if you don't like the strategy, you and this guy would make great trade partners, right?
Yeah.
This guy's not doing it wrong. He's doing it different. There is no wrong.
Right.
And I think that's the funnest part of it.
Every day of the week.
Exactly. Now, all that aside, Bob, I would love to see you do something like this and just watch your hair fall out. It would be hilarious. But while we're here and while we're wrapping up, why don't you tell people again where they can find you and what all you do in this industry and what's coming up next week again if they missed the beginning?
Just in case you missed the beginning, the Fantasy Football Expo, Canton, Ohio, next weekend, August 9th through the 11th. Get your tickets, or you can just show up in Canton, Ohio. Come to the DoubleTree Hotel, check in with set up. But thefantasyfootballexpo.com, the tickets will be on sale probably till next Tuesday or Wednesday. Then we'll turn it off, and it'll be. But you can buy tickets at the door. Definitely come hang out with Andrew and I. Someday Tommy will get there. But definitely come check that out. You can follow me on Twitter at Bob_Long. Get the 2024 Fantasy Football Consistency Guide on Amazon. And it'll get you there in 2 days if you're a Prime member. So check that out as well. Twitter also at the FF Expo. Follow that all weekend. If you can't make it, then just watch that and hashtag FF Expo 24, and you're going to see so many pictures, so many videos, so much fun, and your FOMO will kick in, and I guarantee you will be here next year. So, gentlemen, thank you again for having me on. Great conversation, great discussions as always. And Andrew, I will see you next weekend, brother.
That's right. Can't wait to have a cigar with you, my friend. That'll be a good time. So thanks so much for joining us, everybody. We had a couple people in the chat, but Vegas Jeff, obviously the biggest proponent of us tonight. That was great. Thanks for tuning in. If you're listening to us on Apple or any of the Google or anything like that, please subscribe, rate, review, do all that stuff. Click that like button and all those. Smash that subscribes and all those things. You got me, Andrew Hall, at Andrew Hall FF. You've got Tommy at FF Tommy B. You can follow us at Dynasty Junkies on the Twitter machine because we're not calling it X. That's just not happening. Scott and Rocky will be back at some point. They'll be hosting shows and having the fun. But definitely tag us on polls, tag us on Twitter, send us DMs. We love helping you out. As this season gets kicked off, you're going to start seeing lineup decisions and all of that, and we're here for all of it. Tommy, do you have anything you want to say before we get out of here tonight?
Just a huge thanks to you, Bob. You're a great guest and a good sport. I appreciated the opportunity to disagree with you a little bit and learn a little bit as well.
That's right. That's what it's all about. We're all in this to learn and get better. With that, you're not doing it right if you're not doing it crazy. And we're crazy here. We're junkies. But obviously, junkies out.